It is an absolute pleasure to have him here this afternoon. That is also where I would like to begin this conversation by asking Sabya, what is it about the past? What is it about the timeless? What is it about tradition that holds you so compellingly?
Good evening, Payal. Good evening, everyone. Well, I live in a little bit of a time capsule. As you can see, Payal, it was a nightmare to even log into Zoom. I just learned to do it during the pandemic. Uh, you know, I I never really felt like I belonged in the fashion industry because I grew up middle class, very middle class, if I may say so. And for middle class people, the most important thing when you buy something is value. Of course, there are the tangibles and the intangibles, but I think for us, we are very value driven people. So every time I buy something, or I make something, or I think that I'm going to make something that somebody else is going to buy, I always think, what is the value that we are imparting people? And a lot of my value systems have been derived from my past, from my interactions with people in the 80s and the early 90s, my grandparents. I lived in a small suburban town outside Calcutta. So I think it is this real ethos of time that's gone by, and the value systems that was taught to us, a lot of it which did not translate into modern life right now, is something that the brand has been built upon.
So I want to come to, and there's so many strands in this conversation. I'm going to try and time myself to cover as much as we can, but just a little bit of the emergence of your sensibility. And I just wanted to ask, what were the particular influences? Because you mentioned that you grew up in a middle class atmosphere. The sheer regality, the sheer exquisitely refined sense of aesthetic that permeates your work, where did that come from? Because one would imagine that there's a gap between the lived middle class experience and that quality of extreme refinement and sensibility.
Okay. A part of it comes from the fact that I grew up in Calcutta. Like my growing up years were shaped in Calcutta, and there's so much of a peer pressure to become at least a perceived intellectual in the city. You're in the land of Tagore and Ray, and even you can't really give into a tacky subculture, as they say it, quote unquote. So you have to read Tagore, and you have to read Bankim Chandra, and you have to watch Ray's films. My father's side of the family, my uncles were professors in Bengali literature. My aunt was a professor in Bengali literature. From my mother's side of the family, we come from a family of doctors and educationists. So there was a huge amount of peer pressure. But having said that, my father came to Calcutta as a refugee from Bangladesh, and he was very poor. And my mother came from a very rich family, and her father owned a lot of rice mills. So I think the confluence of both humble and exuberance, and the fact that one side of the family didn't have anything, the other side of the family had everything, and the fact that they had great value systems. My father's father, who I've never met, apparently was a zamindar in Bangladesh, but my father came here poor and penniless. I think the confluence of different kinds of values that come to you because you don't have money, and values that come to you because you're born into money, and the balancing fact between the yin and the yang of having money and not having money, I think taught me both exuberance and restraint at the same time.
So, we tend to read the word tradition in a rather narrow context, I would think, because somehow in our reading, it gets stripped of all personality, as though tradition is flat. But when a lot of your work in individual collections, for example, there's whimsy, there's playfulness, there is a sense of fierceness, there is individuality, there are multicultural influences. Will you tell us, do you think the word tradition is often misunderstood or abused? And how would you read the word tradition?
Tradition is, for tradition to be viable, or for tradition to live, tradition needs to be dynamic. I think tradition needs to be interpreted probably right now season after season in fashion, or year after year, or generation after generation. And tradition is only relevant if tradition is dynamic. I think one needs to understand what one should carry forward and what one should leave behind. And I think if you look at Indian tradition, a lot of it because of politics, a lot of it because of religion, a lot of it because of our social structures have been narrowed down to something that's almost redundant and flat. But Indian tradition, for instance, and tales of tradition that we talk about are quite exciting, multi-layered. It's like a piece of orchestra that you listen to it, and every time you listen to it more and more, you unravel a new facet, a new note that you haven't heard before. And I think one needs to embrace tradition willfully and without prejudice to understand how dynamic tradition can be and how dynamic we can make tradition. And I think it's often a very misused word. And like, for instance, I'll give you an example. A big topic of conversation on my Instagram is cleavage. So when you see, so I remember a comment where a woman said that, I hate you for destroying the tradition of this country. What are you doing? Who do you think you are? She was referring to a blouse where it was showing a lot of bosom. And she said, I remember reading that comment, and it really struck me. Oh, this is what really we are all about. She said, I'm a woman who loves to wear a bikini on a beach, and I wouldn't mind wearing a short dress when I'm partying, or when I'm on a shack in the beach. But it's disgusting to wear this kind of a blouse with a sari. The same woman can wear a bikini, and you don't have there's no value judgment. But if the same woman wore a very revealing blouse with a sari, it becomes tampering of tradition. I think for many of us, tradition is something what we imagine it to be. It's not really the whole truth. It's a perception of the truth. And once people start reading into Indian history, Indian tradition, you'll realize that this country was far more feral, far more dynamic, far more courageous, and far more brave than what we give it credit for. And one needs to go deeper into history to understand how dynamic the tradition of India can really be. There's a lot of hypocrisy attached to the word tradition in this country.
And I wanted to come to some of the women that you've in fact mentioned. You've said that the range of your influences, of course, is very varied, and not just women, but specific to the women. You've said everybody from Frida Kahlo to Amrita Shergill to army officers' wives to circus performers to Bollywood actresses or Hollywood actresses to goddesses. They all come together to be sources of inspiration at different times, right? And again, there's a sense of radicality to a lot of these women. But clearly interpreted to fit into something that we also call tradition. How do you walk that paradoxical line? What does it take to merge radicality and tradition?
I don't really know how to answer this, because this is something that I live every day of my life. I don't want to sound parochial, but I'm born Bengali, and I was raised by very strong, independent Bengali women. My father's mother had 4 children, and she never really married. And and she came from the other side of Bengal to Calcutta. My mother is a very bohemian artist. My mother's friends, who are from the Government Art College in the 70s, I think these are women who did everything in their life, and they did it very freely. I've been raised up by them. I've been raised by progressive, forward-thinking, liberal women. And for me, these are women who wore saris. They wore large bindis, but they had a political opinion. They were sexual. They were free. Their minds were not narrowed down by structures and taboos. And I have never really learned, or I've never really understood how to weed tradition away from modernity. Because for me, tradition and modernity were a way of life that I had always taken for granted, in the sense that, in Bengal at least, it was always a way of life. And all the women all the women that who inspired me, whether it's Shergill, who who did portraits of her which were topless, or whether it was Frida Kahlo who was on the cover of Vogue, I think Vogue Paris, in her Mexican outfit and her unibrow and her flowers in her hair. I think I've always liked women who have had a very strong sense of independence, but at the same time they had a very strong sense of regional identity. And growing up, I've seen that in many people. And when I look at Indian women, I always feel that Indian women look the best in Indian clothes, and it brings out a certain sense of dominance in them, and I enjoy the power that textiles and clothing of the country give to men and women in the country.
So I know that this is it's a much abused question, but I'd still love your take on it, which is, how would you distinguish between fashion and style?
Okay, that's easy. Uh, Fashion is a business, and it's a business where the fashion press, for the longest time, have fed on the insecurities of human beings to sell more clothes. So what we do, we tell people that we are going to give you individuality, but we kind of give them exactly the opposite. In our quest to, what do we do in fashion? We will tell them today that wear a short skirt, so that tomorrow we can tell them wear a long skirt. And when they wear a long skirt, in order for them to buy more, we say a skirt is out, a trouser's in. And when the trouser is in, we say, okay, don't wear a trouser, wear a ball gown. So this is what fashion does. It confuses people, and it constantly makes them we try to tell them that we make you a better version of yourselves, but what we end up doing is making them feel insecure and underconfident. And they all belong to one herd where they spend top dollars to look exactly a replica of each other. When you look at style, style comes from a deeper understanding of who you are, your acknowledgement of yourself. Style comes with being naked and honest in front of a mirror. And I think style comes to women who know what suits them and they stick to it. Style has got nothing to do with good or bad. Anyways, fashion is very subjective. What's good fashion for you might be terrible fashion for somebody else. But style is a very individualistic take on clothing. I mean, style is about people who understand what looks good on them and they stick to it, and it's consistent. And their style becomes somebody else's fashion. So, whether it's Rekha in Kanjivarams, whether it's Simi Garewal in her whites, whether it's Frida Kahlo in her unibrow and her flowers, whether it's Madonna in her crucifixes, whether it's Jackie Kennedy with her pillbox hats, and Audrey Hepburn and Givenchy. These are women who have lived an entire generation or an entire lifetime being exactly who they are and not being apologetic about it. And that is called style. Style is an expression of what you believe in and who you really are. It doesn't change from season to season. And I believe that my brand stands for style and not for fashion.
So just staying briefly with fashion, is there a relationship, or even when we say style, what is the relationship of fashion to time? And I say time both in the sense of, I know you've used the word fursat somewhere, that things of great beauty, things of lasting value are also often built from fursat. But I also mean time in the sense of, is fashion meant to be in the way that we often speak of, saying literature or music, often tells a story of its time, right? And for future generations, it tells you of a particular time. Should fashion tell you the story of now, or should it necessarily take you back into another time? I just wanted your sense of those relationships.
Fashion should always tell a story about now, because that's important. But what you need now is what becomes a trend or a style. So, one of the reasons why I talk a lot about tradition is because for me, tradition is a rarity which needs to be embraced and which needs to come back. It's like a person roaming around all over the world without an identity of their own. What has happened in the last 30 or 40 years, in whether you call it human greed, whether you call it our ambition, whether you call it a new genesis, what has happened is people have constantly wanted to move on to a new something. Whether this something has been necessary or not necessary doesn't matter, as long as we move in for a new change. Earlier on, I used to have a certain set of customers who used to come and tell me, the first question that they used to ask me is, Naya kya hai? They didn't want to know whether they wanted to buy red. They didn't want to know whether they wanted to buy pink. They didn't know whether they wanted to buy a sari or a lehenga. But all they knew was they wanted to buy something new. And my question was, do you need the new? And in your way to find the new, what are the relationships that you have lost? Because I think today, for us to have a more rounded, progressive culture, one needs to be able to understand the past, leave the redundant past behind, and take a little bit of the dynamic past and bring it into the future, because there is no future without the past. One of the reasons why tradition has become a zeitgeist of today, and whether you look at Romango, whether you look at us, whether you look at Anna Villa, whether you look at many designers who are doing tradition, is because we have, as a country or as a culture, we have modernized ourselves, and in doing so, we have lost a part of our identity, which really makes us unique in the global stage and makes us who we are, which is one of the reasons why tradition is going to become the zeitgeist, because this is something that we need. So when we talk about, let's say, this decade, and we say that what defined this decade, I think it was textiles and tradition, because we were finally hankering back to go back to what we have lost. Like if you look at the 70s, flower power was important because fashion cannot be really too, fashion has to be a reflection of life. Fashion cannot be isolated from it, because then it becomes meaningless. So while we had this sense of bohemian whimsy, when everybody was giving up materialism in the 70s, and that's why you have these kaftans, and you have these maxis, and you have this easy way of dressing. Right now, tradition is going to become the zeitgeist of this time, because we have lost so much of it that everyone is hankering to find their way back into it.
So, two of the big, if I could call them, pillars of the Sabyasachi brand, of the Sabyasachi edifice, I would say. On one side is the crafts, right? The crafts people. And I'd just like to talk a little bit more about that before coming to the other, which is also a very interesting way you have of engaging with other people doing other things, which is collaborations. And I'd love to talk a little bit about both, but first the crafts. What is I guess what I'm asking is it that you find the crafts themselves so central to your work, or is an ambition to work with crafts often the starting point for the design? Is it, to put it in a more colloquial way, is it that the design comes first and you look for the craft, or is it that the craft, is where it starts from?
For design to be successful, design needs to be honest. You can't really, you can put any amount of marketing spiel in your design, but a customer will always find an honest design and a dishonest design. So there are times when I don't feel like doing a craft at all. There are times when I want to do something which is very sexy and modern. And there are times when I want to do something which is based with heritage textiles. So I'm very honest with, with what I'm feeling at a particular point of time. I observe a lot of things that goes on in society. And for me, one of the reasons why my brand has been successful is because I can dip my head inside the consciousness and understand what's going to come back next. And but having said that, today, if you look at why craft in India has become important, or why craft all over the world has become important, and I don't want to bash China about it, but China, a stupendous amount of greed and a stupendous amount of unregulated growth in fashion has led to the revival of craft. It's a very simple thing. If you are going to have biryani every day, one day you're going to crave for dal chawal. So I think fashion became everything that was luxury. Everything that was luxury became too mechanized. So big companies spend big dollars seducing big magazines to promote technology as craft, but or technology as luxury. And sometimes it's also called limited edition. But something that comes out of a machine is completely synthesized, where I'll give you a small anecdote here. I'm sorry I'm jumping guns, but I remember uh, many years ago, I went to a departmental store in America, and they were very fascinated by my clothes. And they said that, we would love to buy your clothes. And then she said, so I want to place 50 pieces of this. I want to order 50 pieces of this textile, this outfit. She said, but right, that the parameters are very strong in our company, so every piece has to be identical. I said, ma'am, this is not made in a machine, it's made by hand. They're supposed to be different. Every piece will be different, and that is what makes it unique. At that point of time, the world didn't understand that uniqueness. But today, now everybody is trying to develop things on machine, make sure that things are identical, yet they're giving them a limited edition tag. So what's happening? For the longest time, we have fooled the gullible industry and the consumers in making them believe that something that was mechanized was actually craft or something that was luxury. But as you go and see fashion all over the world, and you see cookie cutter stores and silhouettes and handbags and shoes and trench coats over and over and over and over again, your mind will get so numbed by the sameness of it all that you would want something that is created by hand, that is authentic. And which is one of the reasons craft has such an important role to play, not because of anything else, but because of the fact that it is so rarefied that it has by default become luxury. Which is one of the reasons we are in the business of luxury. We try to incorporate as much as craft as possible, because we have always followed the method of doing clothing in a slow manner. I often joke with a lot of my friends that I say that, when I pass away and, post my lifetime, a lot of the clothes that a lot of people have owned in the country will belong to museums, because there will be a time when this craft will not be available anymore. So we are a luxury brand, and we are a brand that likes to have a certain sense of honesty with our consumers. So we like to incorporate craft more and more, irrespective of what is the theme of the collection. The manufacturing always is craft based.
And I want to stick with this just briefly, because there's, apart from the romanticism of craft, apart from the nostalgia of craft, apart even from the need to preserve something that will very soon die away, I think one of the absolutely salutary and rare things that Sabyasachi, the brand, has done is to show that craft can be great business. And I think you've said somewhere, and I'd like you just to talk us a little bit through that part of your HR mandate is that 15 to 20% more people should be hired every year. And that if there is a machine whose job 10 people can do, get rid of the machine and hire the 10 people. Now, this seems counter to conventional, not just to conventional practice, but to conventional business wisdom. Yet you've shown that you can build a spectacularly successful brand by investing in people. Just tell us a little bit more about that.
It's the people. Firstly, thank you for the question. We are going through a very difficult time when all of us as businessmen, we do not know how long we'll be able to hold on to our community of craftspeople, because when COVID happened, we were not very sure how long the recovery was. So as a brand, at least all our direct employees are still employed, and we have managed to pay them salaries for 5 months, with only 5 to 6% of them actually coming to work, and the rest of them still sitting at home. It's a lot of people, and it's very painful, and it's very, very, very frightening. But at some point of time, I would like to say that it's our craft ecosystem that makes India what India is. Because today, if you look at global economies, they might have marketing power, they might have marketing skills, they might have bigger budgets, but they certainly don't have something that India has, which is a certain kind of a soft skill and a culture community that is preserved over thousands of years. And it is this community of people who are going to be the future leaders of the country, because there will be a time when human beings will be aligned to, as human beings, we are We are social people. We like to, I think the isolation has taught all of us that, we love to celebrate our society. We like to be with each other. I'm sure everybody wants to go out. They want to meet people. They want to hug. They want to make love. They want to travel. And similarly, we want to use things which are made by other human beings. I don't think we are very happy with things which are automated and mechanized. So like, I think it's common business sense to be able to be in India and use craft, because this is what makes us unique, and this is what gives us a power over the West. I mean, if you want to be a global business out of India, and if you don't build it with the soft skills of your country, then you don't have an identity. And all of us are struggling. I talk to a lot of my colleagues, and because we are one of the leaders in the industry, people think that we are not vulnerable to what's happening in COVID. All of us are, we are very worried about losing our communities, because you see, the big problem with craft is that, like, I remember seeing this movie called Help, where I think the mother tells the daughter that courage often skips a generation. But the problem with craft is craft cannot skip a generation, because if craft skips a generation, you will not find a you will not find a roadmap back to the craft again. So I will take this opportunity to tell everybody who's in India, and especially people of influence who's watching this, that please consume more and more craft, because as you consume craft, you will be able to give these people their jobs. And it is these people, it is our culture. And this culture has nothing to only do with textiles. It could do with architecture, jewelry, food, music. It is India's unique culture that makes India a very, very, very strong brand internationally. And when you lose that, you have nothing else to fall back upon. And I've always said that, if you want to adopt a position of leadership, it should come from a point of cultural arrogance. So remember to preserve that culture, because if there is no culture, there is no cultural arrogance.
So, in fact, that literally neatly brings me to the question about collaborations, because along with this cultural arrogance that is central to what you do, there is also a spirit clearly of openness, of receiving from other cultures. And it's not just in fashion. I mean, your collaborations, just a few top of the mind, of course, with Christian Louboutin over the shoes, with now, of course, a specific line of jewelry that's retailing at Bergdorf Goodman. There's, of course, the Pottery Barn collaboration, where you did a line of home for them. And this April, we were to see that very, very widely anticipated H&M, Sabyasachi and H&M collaboration that's been postponed for COVID. What is it that draws you to collaborations with brands in other cultures? And how do you marry the two sensibilities, which is to stay true to something that is familiar to them, but still distinct about you?
It's very simple. I I'm very shrewd when it comes to doing collaborations, and I have only one point agenda, that if the collaboration is not India centric and if it doesn't talk about the country, I'm not interested in that collaboration. I remember when I was doing this collaboration with L'Oreal, uh, I was very adamant, and it was the first that L'Oreal had done, that for the campaign Aishwarya Rai had to wear a sari. And this was something that L'Oreal had never done. It was the first time. I have made H&M do a sari, which when the collaboration releases, you will get it in the H&M stores, a first for H&M, because they've never done a sari before. The entire H&M collaboration is about India. When I did Pottery Barn, the Pottery Barn collection was about India. My collaborations with Christian Louboutin has always been about India and Indian craft. I use these collaborations to, I, I don't fancy myself as an ambassador, but I use these collaborations to become a craft ambassador for the country, because these are collaborations with big global giants who have bigger reach. And through them, if I can take the story of our country, and without apology, to different parts of the world which are wanting to learn about Indian culture, but are either hesitant or they don't have a way to know it, then why not? And I think collaborations are lovely, because it's a great way to tell the story of your country and your people to an audience that is willing to listen, or is at least curious.
So I just wanted to come to jewelry a little bit, which seems to occupy a special place even amongst the range of things that are special to you. What is special to you about jewelry? And it's a linked question also that's not just about jewelry, but clothing as well. Uh, how easy or difficult is it to design either clothes or jewelry for women while being a man?
You know, I've always said that it's very difficult to be a man and design for a woman, because at best we can only imagine what it is to be a woman. We can never be one. But the thing is that over the years I've learned to realize that one needs to be a little sensitive to understand a woman, because men as designers design for women in black and white. So the woman is often a virgin or a whore, but she's never someone in between. But people need to understand that women exists in shades of gray. So I think men, because there is such a big such a big dialogue that's going on about gender fluidity, about inclusivity, that male designers are beginning to learn the sensitivity of designing for a woman. And I think the clothes are becoming softer. They are becoming a little more real, and it's not really everything that's over the top or occasion wear and theatrical, which men often do for women. And I think that soft sensitivity is something that we are learning from women. I am very happy to say that almost 80% of my staff in my company are women, and it is a women-centric brand. And I constantly learn from them, because every time I design something, I'll ask my female colleagues if they would wear it, and what is it about it that they would enjoy or they wouldn't enjoy. And I like to learn from them. And as far as jewelry is concerned, uh, you know, two things. My maternal grandfather, who owned a lot of rice mills in Calcutta, he was an avid jewelry collector. He was a shaukin. So I saw him buying a lot of beautiful jewelry from lovely stores in Milan, in stores in Calcutta. There used to be a beautiful store called Hamilton, which is not there anymore. At least the jewelry section is not there anymore. And they used to buy lovely jewelry, and I watched up seeing a lot of jewelry. In fact, much before I became a designer, I was a jeweler. I used to make costume jewelry out of bone and lac and wood, and I used to sell it in plastic tiffin boxes to hawkers in Calcutta. And that's how Koina Mitra and Bipasha Basu found me. They used to wear my jewelry for their runway shows in Calcutta. And of course, I didn't have enough money. The dream didn't last for too long. And I told myself that one day when I have power and when I have an audience, I will get back into jewelry, because it's very, very difficult to break into the jewelry business, because it's a business that there's a lot of nepotism in the jewelry business, because they say that only a jeweler's son can become a jeweler. It's very difficult for you to become a first generation jeweler in this country, unless you're a corporate like Tanishq. But having said that, we worked hard. And in fact, I laugh. I was telling my publicist, Parina, that, I've been in the clothing industry for 20 years, and I've always wanted to be in Bergdorf Goodman. So Linda Fargo, who's the creative head, she's the queen bee of Bergdorf Goodman. When she came to see my show, I thought she would end up buying my clothes for Bergdorf, but she ended up buying my jewelry. For me, I think that's a huge compliment, because we are at Bergdorf, right across Van Cleef and Arpels, and next to Chanel and Verdura. And it's been a great response. We've got 4 windows on Fifth Avenue, and I couldn't have been more happier. And jewelry is doing very well.
We've just had the unique experience of having jewelry sold on the sidewalk of Fifth Avenue.
Yes, that was quite surreal. I think it was one of the first time for Bergdorf as well, so they were very excited.
Will you tell us a little bit about that incident, because it also speaks to how this moment has affected all of us?
So I remember that we did this very successful collaboration in Bergdorf, where a lot of Indians from all over the world came to buy jewelry. Many of them not even from America. And the pandemic had to cut short the exhibition. I came back home. Bergdorf shut it down. And there was a girl, I think she was holidaying in Mexico, so she couldn't come for the exhibition, and she kept hounding Bergdorf that she wanted to buy a piece of jewelry for her engagement because she wanted to get married in Sabyasachi jewelry. And Bergdorf was so the manager of Bergdorf told her that, listen, they are shut down and they're not letting people in. And she said, it doesn't matter, I'll come to the sidewalk and buy it, just show me the jewelry. So as a first, they organized a curbside pickup and a curbside display. And I was sitting in my shorts and my t-shirt in my living room in Calcutta, and the manager calls me from Bergdorf and she said, listen, this would make this girl immensely happy and all of us immensely happy, because this is a first. We are actually taking your jewelry on the sidewalk in Fifth Avenue, and with bodyguards and a mirror and a credit card machine. And the girl actually stood there on the footpath and buying luxury jewelry outside a luxury store. And then you realize that, how the pandemic has leveled all of us, how the mighty have all come back to their knees. And it was wonderful, and it was great service on Bergdorf's behalf. And they didn't need to do it, but they were very excited, and they said that, we always like to, for me, it spoke volumes about customer service. And it was a surreal moment. I think it's going to go down in Bergdorf's history and our history as well.
I just want to also speak a couple of objects, of course, other than jewelry. The batua seems to, again, occupy a very special place in your imagination. Tell us why the batua is something you return to.
So every designer, after a certain point of time, gets into accessories, which becomes an entry-level point for many people who are not always going to buy bridal clothing. And I always wanted to do an Indian handbag. And while Hermes has the Birkin and Chanel has the boy bag, I said, what could we in Sabyasachi offer? We of course have the widely successful Bengal Tiger clutch and the Taj Mahal clutch. But I said that if I wanted to do a soft leather bag, why don't I do actually a batua? And I'll tell you, my grandmother, my great grandmother, my grandmother, who's my father's mother, she always wore a khadi sari with a khadi blouse with a chandan tika. She used to have coconut oil in her hair. And I remember every time she used to go to the temple or she used to go to the market, she had a very humble black cotton batua, and it was lined with a pomegranate pink velvet. And I was fascinated. She had humble little coins in it, maybe a bus ticket, her little praying beads, a small miniature version of her Gita, and her spectacles. And I just, and I keep thinking about all the fascination with big handbags that women have. And my grandmother was a very arrogant and a very powerful and a very proud woman, because, she self-taught her children, and she always believed in she was very empowered. For a woman at that time, she was extremely forward-thinking, very, very empowered and very liberal. And I kept thinking that if my grandmother actually walked into a party, she would actually silence everybody with her simplicity, which is so. And it is the shape of a batua which made me do what we call the Nani Bucket. It is a homage to my father's mother, who was extremely, extremely simple, and my mother's mother, who was very fragile and slightly over the top. And it was a combination of, it was a combination of their yin and yang. One who was extremely simple, and the other who was very, 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 very ornamental. And I put both their sensibilities together to creating the batua.
So I can see you have a lot of audience questions. As I'll come to them, I just want to ask you to talk a little bit about luxury. What is luxury to you? But also, what do you think the pandemic, because we really cannot avoid this question in this moment, what will it, according to you, you have always looked ahead and been ahead of where the curve is. What do you think will happen to buying, to consuming, to luxury, to our idea of what is essential once we come out on the other side of this?
I think the good thing about the pandemic is that, it helped us prioritize and reprioritize and prioritize and reprioritize over and over again. And a lot of us have learned that money is just a number. I think what, with so many people dying every day and so many people falling sick, I think we are beginning to understand that the biggest luxury is home and family and the sanctity of human relationships. And these are the values that are going to govern consumption for probably the next 2 or 3 decades, because people will seek authenticity, they will seek love. I've often said that, do you know why we talk about retail therapy? We talk about retail therapy is that when you're emotional less and when you're feeling low, and when you see a product, a beautifully made product is made with a lot of love, and it is touched by human hands, and that energy translates into somebody who's probably seeking for it. I think clothes which are made by human hand, products which are made by human hand, tales of authenticity, tales of community, tales of human relationships are going to be the defining features of luxury in years to come. Because what we will realize is that we don't want more, but what we want should be good, effective, and real.
And is there to you a woman who is the Sabyasachi woman? Is there or she doesn't have to be a type, but are there attributes that you think are at the core of the woman you design for?
I've often said that a woman who doesn't like to wear Sabyasachi is probably my muse, because I like women who are confident. There are two kinds of consumers. One kind of consumer who are brand centric, and the other kind of consumer who are product centric. So I think I look for people who buy my clothes not because I'm a brand, but because they like the quality of the product. So the Sabyasachi woman is somebody who's aware, who's probably confident, and who probably has a lot of empathy. I think these are three things that are very important that make you a very well-rounded individual.
Perfect. I'm going to move alongside just to audience questions. Kiara Mehta says, it's a pleasure to attend. My question is, what would be your biggest piece of advice you would give an aspiring entrepreneur? Of course, she says, I'm wishing you all the best and thank you for your time. That question, there's also a couple of anonymous questions which are on the same line, saying if you want both an entry into fashion, or if not fashion, but you want to build a new business, is there something you can advise people on how to do that?
There's a principle that I have maintained for 20 years. Sometimes it's driven me batty, but I've never really given up on it, is the fact that you first need to define the core values of your business, and you need to stick by them, irrespective of whether the world believes in you or doesn't believe in you, because it's your core identity that creates you into a successful entrepreneur. While money is very important, you need to, whenever you're thinking of business, you need to think of business long term and never short term, because short term games always lead to long term disaster. And please remember, there is no shortcut to creating a successful business. It's always going to be difficult. It's always going to be lonely. It's always going to be painful. You're always going to be plagued by doubts. You're always going to be insecure. But that is what will make you a better and better human being. That will make your business more and more mature. And every time you think that you have done your best, start again, because business is a one-way street. It never ends, and there's no return, because the day you return, you need to shut down. So if you have the appetite for a long journey, which is always going to be lonely and painful, but yet at the same time, it fills you up with a sense of purpose, then start a business.
There's a couple of questions, of course, that are about, and I didn't touch on them because I knew they'd come up in audience questions. What is it like to design for high profile or celebrity weddings or A-list clients? Do they end up demanding something that, and how do you navigate? I think the question is really, how do you navigate staying true to your brand and still leaving room for them to be themselves?
When you become a brand which has always stayed true to its DNA, more often than not, people come to you to pay homage to their DNA. So there are, I'll give you an example. There are all sorts of diverse actresses who want Sabyasachi, whether it's Anushka Sharma, Deepika Padukone, Priyanka Chopra, Bipasha Basu, Madhuri Dixit, and the list goes on and on and on. And some of them as different to each other as chalk and cheese. You'll always see them wearing center parted hair, a little bindi on their forehead, kajal in their eyes, maybe a little bit of mogra, the traditional Sabyasachi blouse. I remember that, when I used to when I was younger and when I wanted to read audience reaction and I used to be on social media, I don't do it anymore. I remember people having a field day on social media discussing the merits of my brand completely on the actress's hairstyle. They used to say, "Isko dekho, ye sabka baal chipku kar deta hai. Everybody has center parted, tacky, oily hair with a little bindi and kajal." And I am sure that Sabyasachi has a contract where these girls cannot do anything else, but they have to dress up like that. And I don't tell these actresses what to wear and how they wear. They wear it. I remember when Ranveer was getting married and I was making his clothes, he sent me a picture of a fitting and he said, "Do I look like your campaign boy now?" And you have to understand something. They might be actors or actresses, but they're also human beings. They also have aspiration. And sometimes when you I remember something about Chanel, that very often than not, when you go to a Chanel store, you'll see women in Chanel, wearing Chanel and shopping for Chanel. So you buy into a story, you buy into a lifestyle, you buy into a certain sense of storytelling, and you make it yours. So when I design clothing for celebrities, more often than not, while it's important for them to retain their identity, they also come to me because they want to be a part of a Sabyasachi story. And that makes it easier. So we still have a DNA, but we've defined their individuality as well.
Ashish Taksali has a question saying, what in your view defines a great outfit?
A great outfit has to be about who you are. I don't have a type. Some people say this is tacky, that is sublime. I don't believe in fashion. Like, I have done plastic sequin saris and I've done old antique zardozi, I've done khadi, I've done polyester, I've done everything. I think that if your outfit is true to who you are, like, when I look at Manish Arora's clothes, his outfits are so authentic to who he is. You look at a Manish Arora outfit and you know it is Manish Arora. It is him. It's his life. That's the way he lives his life. I think a good outfit should be a reflection of who you are, not what people want you to be.
Payal Hoon says, a beautiful sensibility towards tradition. Being an army officer's daughter and daughter-in-law, I'm curious to know Sabya's inspiration from army wives. I think the question is there a particular person or what about army wives ever inspired you?
I went to a cantonment school in Barakpur, and I've always been surrounded by friends who came from army backgrounds. And what I liked about the fact that they were never in one place, they were always wandering, but yet they had so much of pride about being Indian. It came from being in the army, and they were always impeccably dressed. And what I liked about them was their sense of pride and their sense of discipline. I think that is what was very endearing to me. It was riveting to see how these women dressed up.
There's a few questions I'm combining because they all come to the central point being pricing. Often the fact that a lot of your clothes are out of reach for a lot of people, a lot of audience members here as well. And I think there's a linked question that I didn't get to that I'd like you to kind of combine it, which is to say, is there something in how we look at clothes that needs, or in looking at your clothes in particular, that needs to change, which is to say, is it time to look at clothes like this as art? Is it time to look at it as something that has its own legacy and will be passed down? And will that change our relationship with what we are able and willing to spend on it?
Good question. See, the first thing that I would like to say about Indian clothing is there is a little thing about ghar ki murgi dal barabar. Because you have craft in your backyard, you don't want to pay for it, even if it's laborious, but you're very happy to buy something from a super brand where something is mechanized and made out of China because it happens to be a super brand. I think people need to educate themselves to understand luxury. As a brand, we do our bit to constantly keep telling people that why are clothes expensive. And then different entrepreneurs have different journeys and different missions. In many ways, my mission is to uphold the tradition of craft at its finest level because let me also tell you something. We are one of the largest copy designers in the country. So our craft exists in watered down versions in different ways. And I don't really get very upset about it because I think that, when you're putting something out in the universe will, I say God is a communist, and the universe will make sure that it reaches to many people in different ways and different paths. But having said that, because I don't consider myself to be a very large brand. We have a brand which has a very large influence, but we are still a very small brand. And till we probably get corporate finance and we can enhance and increase the distribution and create a larger pet line, we would continue to do clothing at rarefied skill sets, because my job is to be able to make sure that I keep the master craftsman alive, because if I keep the master craftsman alive, the entire school of craft in this country will also remain alive.
There's a linked anecdote when you said there's rip-offs. There's also a question saying how do you feel about the rip-offs and when those are sold at 10 to 20% of the price that you might charge. But I know there's a really interesting anecdote that's also very revealing of how you react, of a lady who came up to you, I think at an airport. If you'd just tell us that.
So I think I was in Bhubaneswar airport, and there were probably 5 of us at that airport. It was a late night flight, and I had gone there for a government textile project, and I was sitting at the airport, and there was a woman and a man and her son, probably. They were constantly staring at me, and I was trying very hard not to make eye contact because it was very embarrassing. And because when somebody's just constantly rivetedly staring at you, and I didn't know what to say. And then just before I was going to board my flight, she came and touched my feet. And I was really, really taken aback. I said, "Aap kya kar rahe ho?" She said, "Nahi, aap mera bhagwan ho. We have a temple in the house, and next to the god, we have a picture of you." And I was completely mortified. I said, "What have I done?" I said, "Did your daughter get married in my outfit?" She said, "Nahi, nahi, hum to aapka copy karte hain na, sir." So she said that you're a Lakshmi. So every time you put your clothes on Instagram, हम लोग घर पे ताली बजाते हैं. We said, okay, fine, a new collection has come out, so we can copy and make a new business again. I didn't know whether to feel offended or extremely privileged. So I was very awkward. I think I turned beetroot red, but such is life, and it's okay. I wish her all the best.
So I know we are pretty much at the fag end. If it's okay, we'll take 5 or 7 minutes more because there's still a lot of questions. There's somebody, I think an anonymous attendee, she says, I think the last bastion of handwoven and handcrafted saris are Calcutta and Chennai. There are dozens of us in these cities who have exquisite, precious collections. And being handmade, these textiles will never age. Our dilemma is that as we age, we have nobody to hand over our one-of-a-kind saris to. The younger generation admires them, but will never wear them. Do you have any ideas or suggestions?
I would just say something. Donate them to museums and funds that will look after them for you, because as individuals, I think we need to. I don't hoard any of the art that I have. I put them out in my stores for people to see. I think if your family does not want it, there might be generations after who might benefit from these beautiful treasures that you have that might not get produced anymore. So I think write to museums and textile organizations in the country. Write to Calico, write to other museums, and figure out if there's a way. I always, whenever I make something spectacular, I give it to the V&A, because I think that, if something, I can't keep it beautifully, at least a museum can, and a next generation can benefit from it. Your textiles can become a treasure trove of education for generations to come. So preserve them or give them away.
There's a question that I'm very glad for because it touches on something we haven't been able to. Again, we'll expand on that. It's an anonymous attendee. She says, this is more about your ads, which are so individualistic. Was it a conscious decision to use a darker skin tone most of the time as a social statement, or was it purely based on the model choices? I also want to come to the fact that you have proudly and celebratedly dressed women of all sizes. That could be women who are in public life, actresses. That could be women on Band Baja Bride, where a diversity of backgrounds and of body types, of shapes are displayed. And now as we speak of color. One of the things one of the greatest critiques about fashion is its highly narrowing, highly restrictive, highly sanitized view of what women should look like. And in a quiet but almost incontestable way, you refute that. Tell us a little about that.
So the girl in question, who is a quote unquote large size plus size model, I mean, I think she's a gorgeous girl, Varshita. I don't really travel to many places. So, if I see somebody and if I think that the person has the potential of becoming a model for the brand, I'll go and speak to them. So Varshita was this girl who walked into my jewelry exhibition in Chennai, and I kept looking at her, and she was absolutely stunning. I was riveted, and I was too embarrassed to go and talk to her because I'm shy in real life. So I made some of my colleagues speak to her, and I told her that, would you like to model for my brand? So she looks at me and she says that, that's a really, really, really not a nice thing to do. So I was very taken aback. I said, why? She said, you're making fun of me, right? I said, no, I'm not making fun of you. Why would you say that? She said, no, I had grown up with a complex that I'm not beautiful because people make fun of my skin tone and my weight. I said, do you even realize how sexy and how stunning you are and how you glow? She reminded me of a very Indian Jennifer Hudson. And I said that, I would love for you to model. And then Varshita came and we did a campaign with her. And I remember I wanted to celebrate her body. And you see what happens with India, we have so much of stereotypes in beauty, is that when, more often than not, we cannot handle when a large woman embraces her sexuality. For a lot of people, it's almost offensive and it's disturbing. So if you have a certain body weight and if you look a certain way, you can wear tight-fitted clothes. But if you are large and if you wear something revealing, then people say that you're vulgar. But if you look at Indian paintings, if you look at Indian art, what's happened in Ajanta, Ellora and everything, if you look at Renaissance paintings, we've always celebrated, and I like women with a little sense of roundedness because, there's a certain attribute to being a woman in a certain way. I hope I'm not becoming, what's the word? Exclusive, or, I don't really understand today's lingo. But having said that, for me, it was a personal choice, and I thought that she was very beautiful. And I think she resonated with a lot of people. A lot of people also commented about her because a lot of people found the fact that why could such a large woman wear such sexual clothes? They found it disturbing, but that is where the hypocrisy in this country lies. But I think she was one of the best things that happened to our brand. And we are constantly looking for people. It is not an agenda for inclusivity. Like I said that, I'm very instinctive when it comes to design and choices. I live a very organic life. So I don't really have a certain type. I listened to Madonna one day, Rabindra Sangeet the other day. The next day I listened to Chaya Chaya. I listened to Aap Jaisa Koi, Nazia Hassan. I listen to Shubha Mudgal. I read everything from Betty and Veronica to Archie to Tagore to Paulo Coelho to Eric Segal to Bankim Chandra, everything. So I lead my life in a very organic way. I think the country has boxed me as an intellectual, but I'm a very big free spirit. So I think my choice of everything that I do comes very naturally. I don't think it was very thought of.
It's not a question, but I do want to read out an observation because this is from Ina Puri. Ina was, and the reason there's a resonance in particular, our last conversation was with Ina and Parish Maiti on Nimai Ghosh. And Calcutta was, of course, celebrated there as well. Ina says, Sabya so enjoyed this session, especially observations about the craftspeople. I remember an early show at Sonar Kolkata in 2000 when you presented a gorgeous line of saris and batuas, successfully selling coals in Newcastle. Coming from when she said selling coal to Newcastle, how have you really, what is it that you have done that has made Indian wear sexy to Indians again?
I don't know if it's about if it is about newness or sexy. I think what I did was I often say that I'm not a designer. I'm just a ferryman between the past and the present. You see, you might be living in the fanciest hotel rooms all over the world, but at the end of the day, you get the most beautiful sleep when you're home in your torn pajamas and a t-shirt. When you connect human beings back to who they are, they feel the most confident, and because of that confidence, they also look the most beautiful. What I probably did was I only connected women to something that they always knew but rarely acknowledged. And that was my only contribution. If people say that what was revolutionary about what you have done in this country, I would probably say nothing. I would only say that, what I probably did was I made a connection between something that people had lost and they had forgotten to acknowledge.
And just before we let you go, a final question, and we've spoken of this briefly before. I also did say I do not like the idea of referring to your work or to any work in the spirit of derivation, but we spoke of the idea of the house of Sabyasachi in the way we spoke of, for example, the house of Ralph Lauren. And I want to know what in your vision, where do you see the brand going? What about a house per se to you is freeing up of a vision, to not restrict yourself to one genre, one line, one range of products?
So there are a few things that I need to do. I think the world is waiting for like an organic beauty line coming out of India. It's like a luxury organic beauty line. I hope to create a beauty line which the world can be proud of, which is very Indian. I want to do real estate that speaks about the spirit of India, because all the real estate projects that I see in India are so derivative of the West. I want to get into hospitality. I already have an accessory line, a jewelry line, and I want to get back into kids wear, something that I enjoy doing but I've not been able to do. And apart from that, so it's going to be beauty, home, hospitality, real estate, jewelry, clothing, kids wear. It's enough to last a lifetime, step by step.
Sabya, thank you so much. As we are still literally only at the beginning of what can be a lot of questions, but thank you so much for sharing some part of that journey as well as the vision.